How's it going, guys? Anxious Cynic back again with another Blender tutorial. So today we're going to get into how to use the camera. So before we get started though, I want to go ahead and show you guys the little bit of adjustment that I made to the animation here. So as you can see, I added a quick little walk cycle there for Steve. And if you notice here, there's this little point, if I can zoom in on it here. When Steve comes out, he stops, and I made his pupils get bigger, and he kind of opens his mouth like, oh, wow. And then he begins to kind of move very unfinished like, but we're just going to go with it for this tutorial. And when he comes out here, he just walks over real quick, and he picks up the thing pretty much how we did it in the last part. There's my taskbar. And so then we have this little facial expression here. And that's it. It's a 10-second animation, if you recall the way we set this up. So it all happens pretty fast, but it's good enough for what we're trying to do here. So now that we've got our animation, let's call it done, we want to go ahead and be able to shoot this with the camera and animate it and render it and all that good stuff. So what I'm going to do now is select our camera, and I don't really have to do that, but just so we have it selected, I'm going to do that. And let's just go ahead and move the camera. We're on frame 0 or frame 1 of our animation, so we're at the very beginning. And I just want to go ahead and bring the camera into the house for our first shot here. So there's a couple of things I want to note before we get into this, and that is we're going to end up using a 2-camera setup for this animation. And the reason for that is because of motion blur, basically. If you're using Blender, then I assume you're going to want to have motion blur, especially if you're upgrading from Minimator. You want to have that good quality look, and you could move the camera pretty much the way you do in Minimator, which is, let's go ahead and go back into our animation screen here. Let's zoom in on our camera. And so we've got this point here where the camera is just stationary. And let's move it up to when Steve begins to move. Let's just have it about frame 35. Let's go ahead and insert a keyframe there. And we're just going to say it's a location rotation keyframe. And then let's move it to, say, frame 50. And let's go into our camera view. I'm going to hit Shift F if you recall. Then that gives us the kind of first person shooter mode. And then when we do this, we're just going to move the camera over like so. So basically what we're going to get here is when we play the animation, is that move there. So obviously we may not want the camera to swoop over like that. So on this keyframe here, if we go into our dope sheet, let me collapse this, and we're going to find the camera action for the camera here, and we got location and rotation, and we're just going to look here on the dope sheet, and there's our keyframes right there. Alright, so let's go ahead and deselect those, and I want to select this first one here, so I'm going to click on it like that, and you can see that those are all highlighted. So I'm going to hit the T key. Of course, alternatively, you can, let me grab with the middle mouse wheel by clicking in on it, and you can come down here to the keys and go to interpolation mode, and that's the same menu, and we're going to change it to constant. So if you're familiar with Minimator, then you're aware of the instant keyframe transition, and that's basically what this is going to do. So if we watch this now, let's go ahead and back it up. I'm going to play the animation, and it just cuts to that view, and that looks fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is, though, even though it's doing that, Blender kind of sees the camera as having moved to that position. And when you have motion blur enabled, then you'll get like this crazy motion blur. Let's see if we can simulate it real quick. We're going to have to render a frame out. So I'm going to go down here on our render tab, the little camera there. And you have this option here, which is motion blur, and I'm going to tick that. There's a couple of different ways to do this, which we'll go over, probably spilling over into the next part of this series. But we're just going to use this one for now. We definitely want the shutter to be lower than 0.5, but this is going to give us the most exaggerated look so we can kind of understand. Well, we'll bump it down. Let's just go to, say, 0.3. So I'm going to render this frame here, and we're going to see what it looks like. Oops, come on, go in there. There we go. All right, we're going to see what this looks like and then compare it to when the camera changes. Okay, so real quick before we do that though, we want to add a lamp because we don't have any lights inside this house and it's going to look pretty terrible. So let's just go ahead and let's try, we could use a point lamp, but let's just do an area lamp for now. As you can see, I moved my 3D cursor so that it will spawn somewhere close to us here. Let's go into our top view and go into wireframe so we can see what we're doing. I'm going to hit G and grab and move that over somewhere closer to the character. And let's see if this helps us with our lighting so we can actually see what we're doing. Let's go ahead and bring this down so that the area lamp is actually in the room that we're in. Let's go ahead and save this real quick, and now let's try to render it. Alright guys, so as you can see here, we have Steve moving, and this is our rendered frame. It doesn't look very good because the lighting is horrible, and we have some render settings that we would need to adjust. But you can see that he's not 100% sharp here. If you can see that, you can't really zoom in because we're not rendering at a full frame size, but he's got some blurriness. Alright, so let's hit escape to get out of this, and let's go to right when our angle changes, which is on frame 50, I believe. Yep, right there. So right when that changes, and let's try rendering this out and see what it looks like real quick. Okay, I went ahead and stopped the render because it did enough so you can see what's going on here. You see how this is all like smeared and horrible looking? Well, that's what I'm talking about. When Blender is rendering those things, it sees the camera as having moved to that position in an instant, and we obviously don't want that. So let's go ahead and back out of this. So if you watch Arbiters from Black Plasma Studios tutorial series, when he did this, he's using motion blur through compositing, which is something we'll cover as well, like I said, but probably in the next part. But I'm just using the actual built-in rendering motion blur. In any case, he actually covered this issue, and he does a thing like where he turns off the vector blur in the compositing or something like that. But in my opinion, there's actually a better way to go about that. And what we're gonna do is set up a 2-camera shoot for our animation here. So what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to take the motion blur and bump it down to 0.1. I haven't experimented with this a whole lot, but I just did a quick test before and I found that this looks okay. And I'm just going to turn it off for now though, so that we don't have to worry about that. Alright, so we're back in our default view, and what I'm going to do is cover some of the basics of the camera. So we're in the camera view, as you can see, by hitting the 0 key on the numpad. And I'm going to go over here to the camera button, the camera tab here. When I click on that, we get all these other options. For the purposes of this tutorial, you don't really need to worry about these options here. We're just going to leave it on perspective, but you also have focal length, and you can change whether it's in millimeters or the field of view setting. I'm just going to leave it on millimeter. And you have some other options we're not going to worry about right this moment. And if you come down here, you have a depth of field, and we can turn on depth of field for our camera as well. And we'll get to that in a moment. For now though, if you go to the focal length, and if I scroll this up and down, you'll see that that changes the zoom, i.e. the focal length of our camera. So for now, I'm just going to leave that on 35. Okay, so we want to turn on depth of field, and there's a couple of ways you can do this. I'll probably show the other way in then maybe a future tutorial, but for now, we're just going to go with the basic way to do it, and that is you can use this distance setting here, and you can turn it up. And when we orbit out of the camera view here, let's get in here so we can see things a little bit, and you can turn on the display. I think you can turn on limits. So when you have this on, you can see this line here, and as well as this cross. This cross here represents the focal point of our camera, the lens, basically. So as you can see, it's kind of hard to maneuver in the small space, but you can see here it's not quite far enough, so we want to bring this distance feature up, and you'll see that it moves, and that is where the focus of the camera is going to be. And you also have this down here called aperture, and right now it's on radius, but you can also turn it to f-stop. If you're familiar with cameras and lenses, then you might find this more intuitive. For me, it kind of is, so I'm going to have this on. I'm just going to set it to say maybe 2. We'll just go with that. And you also have these blades in rotation. I'm not 100% familiar with exactly what and all this does and how it affects things. I think it changes the bokeh of the camera out of focus areas, and that is basically the shape of the out of focus areas in the scene. If you're familiar with photography or anything, then you probably know about that, but if you're just making a Minecraft animation, we'll just kind of leave that alone for now. Anyway, this line here that we have, this like straight line, if you look at it, it's gonna come straight out, and it goes for a little ways there, as you can see, and it kind of ends. And I believe that has to do with this setting up here called clipping. If I bring this up or bring it down, you can see that that changes, and basically what that is, if I'm not mistaken, is how far the camera can see and what it's going to render. So if I come way out here, you'll see that it comes way outside of our scene, and that's okay. But sometimes you'll have a bigger scene or whatever, and anything beyond that point, the camera's not going to pick up. So for instance, our clouds here may not get picked up if they go beyond the clipping of the camera. Now, that's my hypothesis. I'm not 100% sure how that works. I would have to experiment with that a bit more, but yeah, we're just going to go with that explanation for now. So it could be wrong. I highly recommend you find like actual like Blender tutorials to understand all this stuff. Okay, so we've got this set up and Steve is sitting there and doing well. So how do we begin to shoot our scene? Now we've got our depth of field, we've got all this stuff set up, now we need to shoot it. All right, so let's go ahead and it seems like it's still got our keyframes there. Let me see here. Yeah, all right. Let's go ahead and get rid of these. I'm just gonna delete these and get rid of them like so. And on say frame 30 here, let's go ahead and go into our camera view. We don't need to be in the animation view right now. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do this. So right here, let's say we wanna go ahead and hit Shift F to pose our camera here. And let's just say we wanna have it framed there. And on the first frame here, let's just say we want the camera to kind of pan upwards. So it's gonna go zoop and pan up and look at Steve, and then he's gonna begin walking. And let's just say right around here, about frame 50, just like we did before, this is where we want the camera to change angles, but now we need the second camera. So what I'm gonna do is come back out here, and I'm just gonna right click there. For me, it's right click. If you didn't change that setting in the first part, then it might be left click for you. I'm gonna go ahead in object mode. As you can see, I'm gonna hit Shift A. Of course, you can come down here to the add and click on that, or go over here to the create tab and you have these options as well, I believe. I think camera, yeah, there's camera. Anyway, I'm just gonna go ahead and hit Shift A. I'm gonna click camera, and then now we have this camera here. So with this camera selected, I'm gonna have that there, and I'm gonna hit the 0 key. And you'll see that it brings us back into the original camera. Well, that's because if you notice, this is a big black triangle here. On this one over here, it's a hollow triangle, and that means it is not the active camera. So what we need to do in order to go to this and make it the active camera is we're going to have it highlighted. So if I don't, then I'm going to just click the camera anywhere that works. And I'm going to hit the control key and then hit 0. And then that takes us into this camera. So now when I back out, you'll see that this one is actually solid. If I deselect it, then it's a solid black camera thing. So now when I just hit the 0 key, that takes us into this camera's point of view. So I'm going to hit Shift F and bring this camera in over here. Bring it in like so. And let's just go ahead and make this camera a little bit more zoomed in. Let's say we'll make it a 50mm camera. If you're using millimeters, field of view may be a little bit different. So let's just go ahead and do that. We're going to turn on limits so we can see what the camera is trying to do here. And you'll see that our focal point there is way over here at the base of the camera. So we want to bring that out, and we're just going to go ahead and kind of eyeball it there. And let's just have the f-stop. We're going to change that back to f-stop, and let's have it go to, say, we'll just go 2 again, I guess. We'll just kind of go with that and see how that works for us. All right, so now the question is, how do we animate this so that when we're watching the camera, it changes between these two as we're animating? And that is a little bit unintuitive, but we're going to get into it. It actually isn't that bad, so just pay attention because it's not exactly as simple as you would hope it to be. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go back to the frame 1 here, the very first frame, and down here on the timeline you have this thing called marker. And if I click this, you can see it says add marker there, and the shortcut for it is the M key. So if I hit the M key, then you'll see we get this little thing here and it says F1, and that is the marker that we get on frame 1 basically. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and rename this marker. I'm going to call this one camera A and hit OK. And then frame 50 over here is where we have our camera. We don't really need to do it this way, but since that's where it is, that's where I'm going to put it. And I'm going to go to add marker, and then now we have F50, meaning frame 50. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this marker and call it camera B. Okay, so now we hit OK. And with this camera selected, I'm going to go ahead and come down here, and I'm going to have my cursor in the timeline window. If you remember, everything in Blender is very context sensitive. I'm going to hit Control and the B key. B is in bird. And I'm going to hit that. And you don't see anything happen. There is no real indication that anything has occurred. But what we've technically done is said this camera is bound to this marker. We've binded the camera. If you see over here, it says bind camera to markers. And so with that, wherever this marker is on the timeline, that is when our camera view is going to shift from the other camera to this one. So let's go back to the first marker, and we're going to click on it to highlight it. As you can see, we have camera A marker selected. And what we want to do is actually select the other camera. If I can select it, there we go. We have that selected, and it's not our active camera at the moment. I don't know if that matters. Let's find out. I'm going to go ahead and have that selected and this marker selected. I'm going to hit Control and B, and then as you can see, that just made it the active camera. And so when I hit the 0 key, this is going to be our view, and when I hit Alt A to play, or alternatively, you can hit this button down here, of course. I'm going to hit Alt A. Steve walks, and then the camera cuts. All right, so you got that little bit set up. Let's go ahead and save. And now you may be like, wow, that's a lot of trouble. Like, I have to do that every single time I want the camera to change. Fortunately, that is not the case. Let's go ahead and just animate our camera here a little bit since we've got some stuff going on. So let's go ahead and say frame 100 there. I'm going to click on the edge of this frame since we're in the camera view, and that actually selects the camera that we're using. I'm going to hit Shift F so that we can go into like a first person mode. I'm just going to have this come over like that. So basically what we get when we play the animation is it comes up, Steve starts walking, and then this camera follows him around, and he goes out the door. All right, so let's save that. Okay, so now we've got this camera set up, and we're good. We like the way this is working out. And of course, we may want the camera to change angles at this point in time. So what I'm going to do is go to the point where I want the angle to change. Maybe since this is on frame 100, let's just go to 101, I guess. Or maybe that is on 101. Let's go to frame 102 then. I could move the keyframes around, but you get the idea. So what I'm going to do is have the camera A marker selected, and I'm going to hit Shift and D on the keyboard. Alternatively, you can go over here to marker, and it says duplicate marker right there, not to scene, but to duplicate marker. So, and you can see there it says Shift D, and if I click that, then that duplicates that one, and now we're automatically moving it around. And I'm just going to bring it to this frame here, and you can see here it says 102, camera 001, camera A, and we're going to have that marker go there. Okay, so one thing we can do, let's go ahead and save. One thing we don't want to do though is have this camera moving in between these points to this point. Like, I'm trying to make this make the most sense as I can, I'm sorry. But we have this keyframe here from the beginning when the camera tilts up, right, and it just stops. And if we go over here to where we move our marker and then set a keyframe for where we want this camera to be now, then it's going to be moving that entire time. And if you recall, this is what we're trying to avoid with the motion blur issue, is we don't want the camera moving up until the point where it switches to it. So since we're not using this camera at this point when it's using camera B, so what we're going to do is go ahead and select this camera here, and if I can select it, give it to me. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and hit I to insert a keyframe. I'm going to click location rotation. So what I'm going to do now is we have that keyframe there, and that's basically just telling the camera, okay, you're going to stay right there at this keyframe point as well. And we've already, according to our markers, we've already switched to the other camera at that point. This sounds really complicated. I feel bad that I'm probably not explaining it the best, but I hope you guys are able to understand what I'm getting at here. So what I'm going to do is take camera A, and right around here, before it switches to camera A, I'm going to go ahead and go to it and set keyframe. Let's hang on. We got to hit Control 0 so we can go to that camera that we have selected. I'm going to hit Shift F, and then I want to bring the camera out, say like right here. All right. So now we have the camera there in position before it switches to it. So the motion blur issue should not occur. Now you may be wondering, why did you set this keyframe here when you just need it to come over here? Well, I don't want it to move in between this keyframe and this one. Basically, I just set that position to be the same there so that the camera stops here and doesn't move anymore. I could use the constant or instant transition, as you may recall, so that it would not move until we got to this one, but then we would have to go into the dope sheet and all that stuff. So this is just a way that we could do it right here in the default view. So I hope that makes sense. I hope I'm not confusing you too much. But that's what we're going to go with there. And as you can see, we switch to this camera. And Steve just comes on out here. And let's just say for this movement here, we want to go ahead and have the camera kind of moving a bit. So let's just say right here, we're going to go ahead and set a keyframe with our cursor in the camera window. We're going to go ahead and hit lock right. And then that's kind of a horrible way to put it, but anyway, then I'm going to hit Shift F with our cursor over there about 201, yep, and we're just going to bring the camera over something like this and just kind of have this little thing happen there. Alright, so now when we watch this, we should get the camera switches, and then it moves over and stops like so, and then Steve takes off running. Alright, so one thing we didn't do though is we got to come out here. We need to adjust our depth of field because Steve is no longer in the same range that he was inside the house. So on this keyframe, if you recall, we can hit the up and down arrows on our keyboard there. So I'm going to go to this keyframe here, and I'm going to come over here and change the distance on our depth of field. I'm going to bring it in somewhere around there. We'll just eyeball it. And then I'm going to hit the up arrow and go to this one, and we're going to go ahead and bring that in and have it be somewhere right around there, maybe a little bit further, something like that. Hit Control S and save, and there you go. So that's basically what you would do to animate the camera for a scene in Blender. I hope it wasn't too complicated for you guys, but now if we play this, you'll see camera comes up, that one follows him over, this one comes around and is like, hey, we got stuff happening, and then he takes off and runs. And we of course want to switch angles at this point. Like maybe he passes the camera there and we'll go a couple of frames. And then we want to duplicate camera B. So I'm gonna hit Shift and D and then drag this over and put it right there. As you'll notice here, when I move that around, let's hit the G key on our camera marker timeline area. You'll notice down there in the bottom left, it says 233 camera. And if I drag this around, once I get that marker on that position, it changes and says camera B, showing us that the marker is on that particular frame. So that's what we're going to do. And we're going to do the same thing for this camera. Let's go ahead and select it. And when we come over, let's just say, let's go ahead and do it the other way for this one. So what I'm going to do is go into our animation scene here. We're going to go to camera 001. I didn't name these. You can actually rename them here. So let's go ahead and call this one camera B. And that way we'll know kind of what's going on there. If we can find the other one, is it right around here somewhere? Yeah, there it is. All right. We can double click on that, and then I'm just going to hit A on there and make it camera A. So that way now we have the corresponding things to our markers as well. So that's something you can do as well. And so what we're going to do is scrub through here, and right here is when it changes. Let's zoom out on our dope sheet here, and right there is when that changes, and we don't want this to be a linear transition anymore. We want to do that constant one. So with this keyframe selected, if you notice, I can click on any of these. I can click the one up top or any of these here. I'm going to hit the T key, and I'm going to say be constant, man, and that way it won't change until we get to the next keyframe. So what I'm going to do now to make this even a little bit easier for me is I'm going to hit Shift D on this, and that will duplicate that keyframe as well. And you'll see here that this line is drawn between these two, and that's saying that this keyframe is exactly the same as this one. No change takes place on any of these parameters in between those two keyframes. I covered this in a previous part, so I hope you remember that, but if you don't, then no worries. And since the camera stops there and we want to change this at a certain point, I'm going to go ahead and change the position of this camera right here into position instead of doing it again right where our marker is, because we don't want the motion blur to get screwed up, if you recall what I say in there. Alright, so this is our keyframe here. You can see with our camera selected. Let's go ahead and select it. Sorry about that. Getting a little bit tongue-tied and confused here. So now we've got it selected, and as you may recall, we can select things from the dope sheet as well. So I just clicked it here in the dope sheet, and it selects it in our 3D view as well. I'm just going to go ahead and grab that and drag it out like so. And at this keyframe here, this is where we want this to happen. So it's all applying to that keyframe that I set. And I'm going to hit Control 0 to go to the camera that I have selected. I'm going to hit Shift F, And I'm just going to bring this one out, let's just say right around here. Since we have this nice zoomed view, hopefully that's not too low. We'll try that. And on this one, I might go ahead and tell it to be linear again. So let's just go ahead and do that, and that keyframe will be linear, and just make sure that you don't have any other ones selected that you don't want to be affected by that. So when we watch this, we should have this happen, and then it'll switch, and it's perfectly fine. It switches right there, and that's what we want. And what we want to do is have the camera probably right around here. I'm going to hit Shift F and kind of pan it over. Maybe we'll even like bring it in just a tad. Something like that. And what we want to do is go back to this keyframe here. And with this keyframe, it's already in position, so it doesn't matter if we copy it and use it. So I'm going to hit Shift D, and I'm going to drag it out. I'm not sure exactly where it needs to be. Maybe let's go ahead and go frame by frame by using the right arrow on our keyboard. Right there is when it switches, so I'm going to go ahead and zoom in to get more precise here. I'm going to hit G to grab that keyframe and drag it right over onto that point. So now we should get that movement just from there, and we won't get that motion blur mess up that we were, so afraid of in the beginning. And at this point, the reason I did that is because we want to actually edit the depth of field. So I'm just going to go back into the default view. We don't have to do this. This is just the way I'm doing it. Sorry if it seems more complicated than it is. It really isn't. You can do it any way you want to. This is just my preferred way. So now that we're in the camera view here, and you'll see here it says camera 0.001 because that's what it was when we had all this stuff set up. So that doesn't really matter. That's the second camera we brought in. So I'm going to go over here to distance, and I'm going to bring it in, and I want the focus to kind of track with Steve. So once we get to the next keyframe, I'm going to have my cursor down here in the timeline. I hit the up arrow. Then I want to go ahead and bring this in and have it focus on him like so. All right, so that should do it. Once again, I hope you're not too confused, but this is the way you can do it without having to do any work in the end process. And when you can duplicate these markers and stuff, it makes it a whole heap easier. Once you do it the first time, you're pretty much all set and good to go. So let's see if we can watch our animation here from the camera's view and see what that looks like. And there we go. So let's go ahead and take a look real quick at what our motion blur is going to do. So let's go over here to our render tab and go to motion blur. We're going to turn that on. And remember, we had this turned down, so it's going to be a little bit different. Another thing I'm going to do is go into light paths, and I'm going to deselect these two options here, the reflective caustics. Let me see if I can expand that. Reflective caustics and refractive caustics. We don't really need that for the basic animation that we have here, and that was causing all those little white spots, what they're called fireflies, and we don't want those. So let's just go to a random frame here. Let's go to outside, actually. So right at the point where it changes one. If you recall, if we had done this the way I did in the very first part, then this frame right here is when the camera would move and it would switch. So it should be really, really blurry. So let's see what this looks like. Alright guys, so there's our rendered frame, and as you can see, there is no unwanted blurriness. All this blurriness here is of course due to the depth of field, and our hoe here is in focus. I need to check that actually. We'll check in a moment here, but as you can see, there is no motion blur. It's only the depth of field blur that we're getting in this shot here. So let's go ahead and go out of this and look at where our depth of field is. It looks like it is right there, and that's not where we wanted it. I'm not sure why. Oh, we didn't set a keyframe. That's my bad. I apologize for that. So the problem that we're gonna have here is I didn't actually set a keyframe for the distance. As you can see, it's just gray there, and I'm dumb. All right, so what you have to actually do is set a keyframe on these parameters here, even over here. If you recall how we did the hoe, like with Steve grabbing it and we turned on and off the rendering, then you have to do the same thing here. So let's go ahead and turn that up to something like that, and then we're going to hit the I key with this selected, or with the cursor over it, and as you can see, it turns yellow because there's a keyframe there now. And here we want to go ahead and bring it back, and like so, and since we have auto keyframing on, that now keyframed that movement for us. So I would have to go back and redo all of these to fix that. when we have the stuff for these other points here. If I can get in here and see what the hell is doing. You're in there, man. Now again, there's a different way to do this. I'm just doing it this way. We'll cover a different way in the future, but for this purpose, we're just gonna go with that. And I think that should do okay. It doesn't switch immediately, so we're just gonna go ahead and come to this point for the longest time that it's gonna be here. And set that to be like that. All right. This one might be a little bit tricky because we have some movement on the camera. So I'm going to, if I can click it, I'm going to drag it in. So I have those 2 points set up right when he first opens the door, right when it first switches to this camera, and then right when he gets closer. But as you can see, the camera and Steve are moving at this point. I'm calling him Steve. It's actually me. So what I may want to do is edit that if that point isn't staying where I want it to be. So like right around here looks okay. I'm just going to go ahead and mess with it so it creates a keyframe. And then we're going to come here. Somewhere around there. Looks like it's kind of losing it. So let's bring it in a bit. And that doesn't look too bad the way that's moving there. As you can see, when I had that render, it was very shallow depth of field, and that's because I had my f-stop set to 2. The higher that number, then the less shallow it is, and the lower the number, the more shallow it is. Like again, if you understand anything about how camera lenses work, then you already know that. But you can play with it and kind of see the results that you get there. Let's just go ahead and try rendering one of these shots, and that'll be it for this tutorial. So let's see what this looks like. Alright guys, so now you can see this is our final rendered frame. It does not look good because of our render settings and that light that we set up inside there real quick like. Hopefully we can rectify some of those issues individually, but for now, that's it. So you can see here that Steve is in focus and we have some out of focus areas even though it's all screwed up looking in the background there. Another thing to note is the focal length. This one's wider than the other shot. If you recall, the other one is 50 millimeters, I believe, and this one is 35. So if Blender is simulating that accurately, the wider the focal length and the less the depth of field will appear, like even with the aperture. So that's something to keep in mind as well. I'm not 100% sure on that, but just keep in mind like all these different things, the focal length and your aperture setting are going to affect how shallow the depth of field is. In any case, that's going to be it for this tutorial, guys. I really apologize if this seemed too complicated or I didn't explain it well enough. I did my best for my first attempt at explaining this this technique here, but I think if you practice it and learn it, it'll save you a lot of trouble in the end. So of course, if you have any suggestions or better methods than what I showed here to do these things, which I'm sure there are plenty of, feel free to chime in the comments with those. In any case, I hope you learned something. I hope you liked the video. If you did, feel free to hit that like button, comment, and subscribe to become a Citizen today. If you want to support me and the channel more directly and help me to do more of this stuff, feel free to check out the Patreon link in the description. But otherwise, that's going to be it. So I will see you guys in the next video.